Great. So we are at the 4 p.m. mark. So do we want to go ahead and kick us off, Christina?
Sure. Thanks, Martelle. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christina Chauvinay. I am the Senior Manager of Research and Program Innovation at the National WIC Association. And I'm really excited to be here and to have the opportunity to let our collaborators from Nava as well as Montana WIC speak about their project, which is really exciting, really innovative. And I also just wanted to share with you all before we get started, just a little bit of background on sort of how we've been working with NAVA as the National WIC Association. We have a newly formed WIC Technology Resource Group, and some of you may have attended our office hours in the past. We do offer regular office hours to help troubleshoot challenges you might have relating to technology. We've put together some resources on the WIC Hub, and I've just had a really collaborative effort on making sure that we are using all types of technology and human-centered design to inform and improve the WIC participant experience. So I think that this is a really great project that I know we'll be able to build on in future. And I'm excited to see this full presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Martelle Esposito, to launch into the presentation.
Yeah, and actually, Christina, I'm gonna turn it to Kate to
Sorry, Kate.
launch us. No worries.
That's okay. That's okay. There's gonna be a lot of bouncing around today. So thank you everyone for joining. I think we will have a lot more people joining as we go because lots of folks registered, which is very exciting. I am particularly excited to share this project because it's been a labor of love for at least parts of it for years. So thank you for joining today. I'm Kate Girard. I'm the State WIC Director. And with me today is Kirsten Crane. She is our public health consultant here in Montana. She is a co-founder of Yarrow, and they're a small but growing, mighty public health consulting company that has done wonders for us. We also have Warren Peterson and Martelle Esposito from Nava, and we'll each get to talk a whole lot. You'll hear a whole lot more about us. But in short, as Christina mentioned, we've been working with Nava on this demonstration project, and so you'll hear a lot about that today. Advanced slide. Okay, so the objectives for today, I'm just going to go ahead and read them out, get us all on the same page. Is to describe what a needs assessment is and how you can apply the needs assessment methods to your agency, to translate a needs assessment into a nutrition services plan, including technology, such as the one we're going to talk about. Describe what an API is and the impact an API standard could have for various stakeholders in the community. And describe some small steps that Montana and Nava are taking to achieve big goals for WIC technology. So a lot. We do have a lot of content today, and we're planning on time for questions and answers at the end, but don't mind us if we talk fast and move quickly because there's a whole lot to cover and this is recorded. So hopefully folks can jump in and review it should you miss anything, or reach out to us, of course. So with that, the first section here is going to be presented by myself and Kirsten, and that's to review the process of our needs assessment and the nutrition services plan that we just finished developing last week. It's still a little bit in a rough form, but we are proud of where we're at. Go to the next slide. So this slide is just my way of very simply explaining what we've been doing. So we're going to talk more about what a needs assessment is today, but essentially this needs assessment that we've developed is the first one that Montana, to my knowledge, has ever created. It is very comprehensive. It has really been fundamental to us getting a very clear snapshot of where we've been, where we are, where we're heading. And as many of you know, if you've worked in WIC or for WIC, a state nutrition services plan is part of what state agencies are meant to do on regular time intervals, whether it be a year, every few years. And then local agency should have nutrition services plans as well that fit into the state nutrition services plan. We have always struggled with that because we didn't have a needs assessment. We didn't really have all the information that we needed to develop a good nutrition services plan, which you can also just call a strategic plan. That's really what it is. And so I feel really, really good about where we're headed, because I feel like the intent of the nutrition services plan and the local services plan now has grounding. It now has somewhere that it came from. And then what I see going forward over the next several years is that this is going to be our driver in our document to push us forward in more of a continuous quality improvement work style, which again, I think we do a lot of quality improvement work in WIC. We just don't do that full CQI, always revisiting, always looking at the data, always advancing based on that. Because we're just so busy. We just know a lot, and we just implement a lot of like great changes and great remedies, and then we just keep rolling. So I'm really excited that we have a more formal process moving forward. Next slide. This is a layout of what it looks like. So this is just a flow chart, clearly, that is just at a high level to describe what we've done and where we are. So in order to build the nutrition services plan, we first reference the nutrition services standards. There's a lot of words in there. I'll probably start abbreviating them here to like NSS for nutrition services standards. So as part of the nutrition services standards review, we pulled data. We pulled a ton of data, and Kirsten will go a bit more into that process. All the data that we have available. And again, anyone working for WIC knows we collect a ton of data. We're not great about pulling it and using it and making sense of it, or even having data across different states or nationally to compare and contrast where we are. We did an abridged version of the nutrition services standards self-assessment, which is like at the beginning of the NSS, and it's meant to drive a needs assessment. It's pretty cumbersome and complex, and again, we'll touch on that. But we did a shorter version of that with our locals to get a sense of our needs assessment content. So then that flowed into prioritized recommendations, and then down, and then it goes into the strategic plan stuff, state level goals, objectives, action plans. The nutrition services standards, as we're going to talk about again, we are continuing to reference and use in some capacity, but I'll go into that a little bit later as to the pros and cons of that. We just wanted to highlight that that was a document we were referencing along the way, and we did try to stay to some fidelity on the standard areas that USDA has outlined we should be looking at for a quality program. So on the bottom here, we see the red, orange, orange. That is really our state plan. And then of course, the local agency action plans will fit within that. Slide. There's our pop-up. So this is the cover of our needs assessment, our beautiful needs assessment, which is also on our website. And I believe we're going to drop a link to that in the chat. But I am going to hand it over to Kirsten, because they were the masterminds and did brilliant work around this, and they're going to present at least some of the results.
And after 3 years of Zoom, you would think I could remember to unmute myself before I start talking, but here we are. My name is Kirsten Crane. Thanks so much, Kate. Again, I'm with Yarrow, and we're based out of Montana. We had the privilege of working with the Montana WIC program as they embarked on putting together this first statewide WIC needs assessment and the subsequent nutrition and breastfeeding services plan. So I'm really excited to be here with you today to show some of the inner workings of that. I could talk for hours. I'm going to keep it to 10 minutes. So with that, Martelle can go to the next slide. So jumping into the needs assessment, I'm a dietitian. I can't see all of you who are on here, but I would imagine there are a lot of dietitians here, being from the WIC world. I actually worked in WIC right out of graduate school. And one of the first things that we learn is when working with patients, an individual patient, you have this ADIME process: assess, diagnose, intervene, monitor, reassess, diagnose, and you go around and around as you do medical nutrition therapy with a patient. We do something very similar when we're sitting at the public health level working with communities. In our case here, our patient is our community. And in this specific instance, our community is our WIC, all of our WIC stakeholders, staff, participants. And so that is the focus of our assessment here. Needs assessments are often also called just health assessments. They're a great best practice that are done at all sorts of different levels, from single organizations like WIC is doing across their organization, up to, counties might do them, tribal communities, states, nations, even, we've got the sustainable development goals at the global level. So everything nests in these assessments. Assessments identify key health and other needs and issues through really systematic and comprehensive data collection and analyses. And by identifying all of these key health needs of a community, we're able to create strategic plans or improvement plans to then drive the implementation of the interventions that are necessary to address those needs from the needs assessment. And then the plans help us justify how and where resources should be allocated, so that as we work to meet those identified needs, we are focused and strategic about it. And of course, we've made the plan. Making the plan isn't the end of the line. We actually have to implement the plan and conduct ongoing monitoring and evaluation to make sure that we stay on track, or that we can pivot quickly as necessary. We all remember COVID. It gives us a way to work and to work effectively. This kind of cyclical process in a community setting like this, we usually do this about every 3 to 5 years. So a new needs assessment, a new plan, and implementation every 3 to 5 years. So we're just embarking on that right now. You can go to the next slide. So thinking specifically about how in the world did we do this needs assessment? It's a labor of love for sure. It took us about a year. We started by actually looking at what other states had done for needs assessments in WIC. And there have been some really nice examples in the past, but pretty slim pickings overall across all of the states. We then looked at kind of identified major topic areas that we knew we'd want to look at. And then within those major areas, which data points or indicators we wanted to include. And a lot of those decisions about which data we were going to look at were driven by 3 main forces. We used WIC subject matter experts, including the Wic Work Group and state WIC staff. And just a quick, the Wic Work Group in Montana is a group of locals who represent different sized agencies from all over Montana, who come together about 3 times a year and work with state WIC staff just to make sure that there's really clear communication, guidance. A lot of quality improvement work happens in that setting. And so it was a really nice and natural use of those talents and energy. So the Wic Work Group, state WIC staff, we also heavily relied on the NSS, as Kate was talking about earlier, the Nutrition Services Standards. And the third thing we took into great consideration is just what data is available. And so those kind of main things drove the final indicators that we kind of came up with, and we came up with a lot of them at first. So we started very broad, and over time really narrowed down to about 60 different data sets that we found to be like the data was available, it was useful, it answered the questions that we all had and wanted to know. We then started really collecting the data, and I will go into the different sources of data that we used in the next slide. That's a place that we could spend really a lot of time. So we'll try to not sink too deep into that today. After we got all of the data collected in this kind of real iterative process of discussing, the indicators, how useful they were, how we really wanted to display them, we then sent all of it to our graphic designer for data visualization. And I included a page of the assessment on here because really I can't overstate the importance of data visualization and beautiful graphics to really not only draw people in, but help understand data, because WIC is full of kind of complex, nuanced indicators that maybe sometimes only WIC staff will really truly understand, but there's a lot that if we just reframe it a little bit, a lot of other stakeholders and partners are going to be able to get a lot out of. After the data visualization, it went through the highest reviews of kind of state level staff at DPHHS. And then we were able to put it on our website, and we did drop that link in the chat for you there. Next slide, we'll talk about data sources and disclaimers. I'm going to focus on the sources though, because we don't really have time to get into all of the disclaimers here. Data collection, we used, as you would suspect, both primary and secondary data sources. Some of the major primary data sources included things like the Montana WIC Participant Satisfaction Survey, Customer Satisfaction Survey, a survey that we created specifically for this needs assessment that included a lot of the NSS questions. Of course, we pulled a lot of data directly from MSpirit and other state data sources for staffing levels and at local agencies and things like that. Going to put a note out here, and I know that Kate will talk about it a little bit more, that MSpirit, even though it is a wealth of information, because it's designed to take data at a patient or individual level, it's not always great at being able to take the data and then summarize it at population levels. And so it's just one of those things to kind of think about as we think about technology and the use of things like MSpirit going forward. Major sources of secondary data included the census. The CDC has all sorts of great things, including their breastfeeding report cards, PRAMs, PNSS, PEDNIS. We had a lot of good Montana specific data that had been collected by our EPIs for different projects, but became very relevant and useful in including in the assessment. One of the most prolific sources of secondary data is the USDA's WIC participant and program characterization reports. These are unpublished at the state level, but they are reports that come out every 2 years, and they lag by about 2 years. But they are just incredibly detailed, rich data sets that allow you to compare your state to national indicators across a lot of different topic areas. And we were also able to get even down to some county level information from some of those. And so really, really great data sets to use. A little bit lagging in time, but tons of great data. And of course, that's all I'm going to talk about here for sources for now, but you can check out the needs assessment. We've got all of our sources listed there. And so hopefully that'll be really helpful in kind of understanding where to start when you all go to embark on your own needs assessments. And then the next slide just shows basic sections that we divided the needs assessment up into. And so Martelle, you can go to the next slide there. There we go. And you'll see that I would imagine these sections should look rather familiar if you are familiar with the NSS. We use the NSS, we leaned on it very heavily to inform a lot of these sections so that we knew we weren't missing anything, and then inserted additional sections as we knew that we needed them from input based on state WIC staff, local WIC staff, partners, and others. And then in this next slide, we've got some bullet points about the nutrition services standards themselves because they played such a big role in this assessment. And I'm going to hand it over to Kate here to give a little bit more information about the NSS and how it can be utilized.
Thanks, Kirsten. As we mentioned, we relied heavily on this, and so it is really worthy of pausing and talking a little bit more about the NSS. As you can see here, the reference is, this is directly from the USDA website, and the link on the slide is right where you can see these words. This is from 2013, and there hasn't been an update since then. But so I'm going to just chat a little bit about this for context. As a local agency staff and state WIC director, I've been both at the local and state levels. I've read and referenced this resource a lot over the years. It does have real value for WIC, and then it takes a very complex set of regulations, policies, guidance, and it converts them into an easy to understand handbook of sorts. That's how you can think of it if you have not seen it or used it. While it has not been updated in a while, it is still very relevant to how we do business in WIC. In my opinion, it's more of a best practice or translation of USDA's vision for how the program should be delivered. There are very specific references in the NSS to source back when something is required per regulation versus policy guidance or best practice. This is helpful because not everything in here is required, and that really does need to be considered and understood, that this document in and of itself is not everything you do in WIC exactly how it says. That said, at the very heart of this document is a list of areas worthy of assessment at both the state and local level, ideally at regular intervals, such as annually. It's my understanding that this is not widely happening across WIC state agencies or local agencies, perhaps, and it really is not mandated per se. So that's not a knock on anybody. It's just it's a tool. It's something we can reference and use. It's a really nice place to start if you're doing a needs assessment, but I'm not aware of many states actually using it regularly. In developing our needs assessment, again, I highlighted this to Yarrow as a really good place to reference for structuring it to make sure that we're looking at all the areas that really USDA have laid out in there. We also went through an exercise to actually use the assessment tool, which is how it starts at the very beginning of the NSS. It basically says, use this assessment tool to see how you're doing. And I think that's USDA's way of helping us do a bit of a needs assessment. That said, I call it an exercise because it's not actually something you just click into and do. We actually created a spreadsheet. This is an exercise. We did this to see how this would roll out. We created a spreadsheet with all of the areas and many tabs for each of the standards. We broke it into state and to local. Some of the local we put out into a questionnaire for the needs assessment. Towards the end of the needs assessment, right about when we were doing our state nutrition services plan, we also did an exercise with state staff on the state level standards. And I will just say that it was a very, very complex process. I would not highly recommend doing that off the bat. I think the value in this is to say that it's a great reference. I think there's more potential for using it. But I do believe it will take some refining or a really good usable tool to have it be usable across the nation. And so I think it has great information, but I also, I don't believe that it's like just something that any state or local agency can just take and use and develop a needs assessment. That's really where I wanted to go with that. But I do also want to give props to USDA for creating this document. And I really do hope they keep it updated going forward and maybe help refine this tool so states can do an easier needs assessment. Slide. And so these are the standards. Again, just in the interest of time, these are what they are. We haven't broken out here by staffing and everything else, mostly because staffing is a big focus, of course. And so if you read our needs assessment or the NSS, you will be able to dive into that. Next slide. I believe I'm handing it back over to Kirsten.
Absolutely. So just a reminder that throughout this process, we engaged with and really leaned on our partners and stakeholders from WIC's much larger network. And we considered the type of information and data that they collect and what they might find useful from the assessment. We used all of this iteratively to develop and frame the assessment and its ultimate recommendations. This also helps to ensure that there's buy-in when we start doing the planning process. And we need to call on some of those partners to help implement parts of the plan and the work that we do to improve as a state program. And so in the next slide, we can see the final assessment recommendation priority areas. And those translated then directly into the main priority areas that became the nutrition and breastfeeding services plan priority areas. So you can click one more time, Martelle, and it should kind of transform from our assessment recommendations to our priority areas in the strategic plan. And that's where I'll give it back to Kate. She'll walk us through the strategic plan.
Thank you. Next slide. And so again, very high level. Certainly we don't have time today to go into depth with this, but once we do polish it off, we will make it widely available. And again, we just wrapped it up last week, so we are definitely in polishing mode. So the needs assessment, again, I just want to connect the dots here. I want this to feel like a full circle webinar, in that we have the needs assessment that collects all the information and talks about really where there are gaps and where we can focus our attention. The State Nutrition Services Plan, which is federally required in a sort of vague way in the regulations for each state, and then that should translate into local agency nutrition services plans. So so as you see here, this is just how it's laid out in terms of a format. We have a priority area, which we'll have an example of here coming soon. We have the priority areas that Kirsten just showed. Within that, of course, we have goals, objectives, strategies, and action plans. And then next slide. And then we plan to, we have not done it yet, we plan to create a tool for locals to use that's based on the State Nutrition Services Plan and can be a very easy place to select which priority areas they want to work on, what goals, objectives, action plans they want to have in sort of a structured way, but a simpler way than we have it here at the state level. And then that should help us advance our goals, right? And we would track the data here at the state level. So again, all linked, nice little puzzle we're putting together. Next slide, please. So this is one example of a priority area and one of the goals, one of the objectives, and so on. And this is what will help us transition to the work we're doing with NAVA. So priority area 1 is increasing participation. The goal here, increase the percent of the eligible infants and children participating in WIC in Montana by 10% from 55.5 to 65.5, and so on. So as you all know, to increase participation, you have to look at recruitment and retention. So one of the objectives is recruitment. And so we've defined who we want to focus on for that recruitment piece of fulfilling the goal. The strategy is to perform a novel pilot project, such as the one we're doing with NAVA. And simply put here, it's to pilot at least one project to ease access to WIC using an online screening tool or an online application. And the action plan, of course, would be then the scope of work, the action plan that NAVA has. So we would reference that. So we're already like accomplishing our goals here. See that? Next slide. And so this is just a graphic representation of my world in technology from the state level perspective. Many of you who know me know I struggle with it because it's very complicated, it's very piecemeal, it's a bit antiquated, and change does not happen easily or quickly. So just to give a snapshot, each state have an MIS, which is the Management Information System. For Montana, that's WIC. That talks to a bunch of different systems. It talks to our EBT provider, forward and backward, and then it also sends information out to various other technologies. For instance, we have Tableau for reporting data. We have an interface to look into whether someone's on Medicaid, SNAP, or TANF. We have an appointment reminding text company. We also have a shopping app. So those are just examples of how data flows out of Spirit, but not in a really great way. Most of those are like nightly files, secure file transfers, and changing anything in here, adding any technology, updating anything, you have to think about this whole picture. So picture one is my daughter looking at like just a field of weeds. And to me, that's like looking at our technology. Picture two is my daughter like, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to do something really cool. I'm going to accomplish something. We're going to do something really amazing. And then that's her three thinking that she did it. But in actuality, I'm really my daughter on the right. I'm really like, oh my God, I need to climb up this tree and there are no branches. And so these are actual thoughts that go through my head when I think about any changes in technology. I think about how we're going to fund it. I think about the requirements at both the federal and state levels. I think about procurement practices. I'm sure I don't have to go into detail on how complicated that can be. Interoperability, again, between the systems, federal and state approvals, which can take a very long time. Feasibility, sustainability, oh my, right? Like I could go on and on and on, but next slide. The beauty of it is there are companies like Nava who come along with amazing opportunities. They had this fantastic demonstration project they had pitched and were ready to do, and they wanted a state that was a little bit thinking outside the box and ready to pounce, which is, I'm always happy to do. And so we joined with them because this was actually very feasible for us. We didn't have to procure, we didn't have to fund, we didn't have to have our IT involved in any way, shape, or form, really. And it was really us. It's really us providing technical assistance and expertise at the state and program level to help Nava build something really innovative and really helpful, not just for Montana, but for the entire WIC community. And so they will go into depth on that. But this is not my baby, but it is a baby I know. And so again, picture one is me thinking about all the things on the last slide. And picture two is kind of what I looked like after we discovered with Nava where we were headed. I think we're very optimistic that we're making some progress, even if everything doesn't shake out exactly the way we originally envisioned. I am excited to hand it over to Nava to talk about that project more. And Martelle.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate. My name is Martelle Esposito, and I am the Partnerships and Evaluation Lead at Nava. And there was a question, what is Nava? We've been talking about Nava. Nava is a public benefit corporation that designs and builds government services that are simple, effective, and accessible. We've been working with a range of federal and state programs over the past several years to improve access and reduce administrative burdens and try to reduce complexity in government systems. So now I'm going to share some context about a modern software development practice that could help overcome barriers to innovation and scalability across states in the WIC program. And then after that, my colleague is going to talk about the demonstration project collaboration between Nava and Montana, working to address the needs in Montana. So all of those needs that they identified in their needs assessment, while also trying to help overcome some of these more systemic barriers in the program for technology innovation. So let's dive into APIs and API standards. And I love that Kate calls them APIs. We can go to the next slide now. So for a little bit of background, in 2020, Nava worked with the National WIC Association on a landscape assessment of enrollment and certification technology. And the goals of assessment were to catalog online tools used by state WIC agencies to support certification, understand and assess opportunities and challenges these tools introduce, and make recommendations to support increasing the ability of WIC to innovate. So next slide. not surprisingly, there's a lot of innovation and innovative ideas out there from WIC staff, participants, and partners. But as Kate noted, there are some real barriers to achieving the visions that you all have at the state and local level and the federal level for addressing participant needs, staff needs, program needs with technology. And one of the key findings from the analysis was that most state agencies are approaching certification innovation in two specific ways: via direct extension of the MIS. And some of the challenges that we know related to this is that it can be complicated for consortia to align on changes to the MIS system. And for states to go do their own thing, it can be cost prohibitive for small and medium-sized states to pursue their own vision. Or states are looking to external tools, procuring or developing standalone tools, which can be valuable for participants, but can also fragment that participant experience and can increase burden on clinic staff who may be manually tracking multiple different technology tools or transferring data manually between systems and apps for the benefit of that participant experience. And so I want to talk a little bit briefly about why this happens in WIC, and then talk about how we might be able to change this. So next slide. So as you know, or you may know, some of you may know, all MIS for WIC are built to conform to the FNS document, Functional Requirements Document for a Model WIC Information System, or FRED. FRED specifies what the system must be able to do without specifying how it will be done by a vendor. So we get interoperability defined for the MIS, but only so far as reconciling data from EBT systems. It's very specific around the data engagements with EBT systems, but not with other systems and tools. And in the age that we live in, where there's a proliferation of interest in new tools to support participants and program administration, we end up with quite a fragmented system. So let's go to the next slide. So essentially, as a result of this lack of standard or definition of how the MIS talks to a range of tools, each MIS is its own separate walled garden. So it's kind of a metaphor analogy. I'm not sure which one is the correct term, but you can envision each MIS as its own separate walled garden with its own ways of data import and export. And then if you go to the next slide, MIS vendors are contracted to build new tools or renovate older tools in their garden to give WIC agencies the functionality they and participants need. But other WIC agencies often cannot buy or use tools that are made for a particular MIS system unless they are on the same MIS platform. So the tools have traditionally stayed within one garden. Next slide. Additionally, WIC agencies are also building and buying tools outside of these walled gardens, these MIS walled gardens. And as noted before, this might result in manually entering data between the different systems. For example, an agency may use a standalone scheduling app that does not connect to the MIS, which might allow participants to schedule their WIC appointments online or by phone. But the data collected from the participants through this process might need to be manually entered by staff into the MIS if you want to have it accessible via the MIS. So that brings us to the next slide, which is essentially WIC agencies don't need to be limited by these three options. There is a third option, third model that exists and is actually quite common across other government programs. And our recommendation from the landscape report reflects this. That involves implementing technology with this alternative model, which is developing tools that are interoperable so they speak to each other and share data via application programming interfaces or APIs. This model coupled with modern software development practices like human-centered design, can ensure that we are creating tools that meet the needs of all users and promote participant choice while also having operational efficiency. So next slide. So essentially, APIs are the ladders between the walled gardens and the outside world. And so the ladders between the MIS and the tools and the systems that exist outside of the core MIS system. They can unlock access of WIC data in safe and secure ways. And they are software that can connect disparate technology tools and systems to share data. So next slide. For example, an API could be built to connect that standalone scheduling tool to an MIS so that the data from the scheduling tool is accessible to staff within the MIS dashboard. Additionally, tools that work today with those nightly exports that Kate was talking about could have real-time information within the MIS dashboard. So the good news is there are currently some APIs in use in some state programs to connect data between technology tools. But the bad news, next slide, yep. The bad news is they're built to connect to specific tools and specific MIS. And API use is not pervasive or equitable across the WIC program. So next slide. So that's where an API standard comes in to create that, that more equitable access across the program and also have some additional benefits that I'll talk about. But essentially, an interoperable technology ecosystem can be catalyzed by an API standard across the MIS systems, which can open the program to the kind of innovation administrators dream of. Without needing to make direct changes to an MIS system and risk other consortium members with changes. It will also make it easier to quickly respond to evolving needs of participants with more opportunities for plug-and-play tools available to states to customize to their needs without needing to start from scratch by building a new tool. So practically, what does this mean? So if every MIS implemented an API that aligned with a standard, and if all MIS functionality is securely and safely available via API, then, next slide, the barrier to building new ideas is no longer, can my MIS support this feature, or does everyone in my consortium want this feature and agree on this feature, or is this tool going to add too much administrative burden on staff? Instead, the walls around the garden, they still exist, but now we have those API ladders to see over them. And the standard adds value because it makes it easier to develop and share tools across agencies. So a tool that provided online appointment scheduling could work with any MIS for any agency. And we could have your favorite two-way texting solution from one state quickly deployed again to another state with a different MIS. It could even mean a library of plug and play tools could be created that state and local, even local agencies could choose to take up and customize to meet the needs of their unique participants. And it even enable a future state in WIC where participants could have the option to have most of their certification information obtained from other data sources, like other government programs, the tax system, and physicians. The technology could enable this if this is the direction WIC chooses to go down. And it should be noted that a WIC API standard would also not be the first API standard. There are many models that WIC can look to for developing and updating a successful standard in practice. For example, the Australian economy-wide banking, energy, and telecommunications standard called Consumer Data Right, or CDR, allows consumers to grant access to their data housed in different systems. Imagine going to the DMV and not needing to compile copies of documents for your proof of address, and instead could check a box to grant permission to access certain components of your energy and telecommunications files to show proof. Another example is the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, or FHIR standard, which allows electronic health records to speak to third-party applications to extract clinical data for improving health. Providers no longer have to export data via spreadsheets. Patients have more access to their medical records via web portals and apps, and standardized data across multiple EHR systems means less time for data reformatting and more time for analyzing it. So with a WIC API standard, we believe that the future for WIC innovation is wide open. And with that, I'm going to pass off the presentation to my colleague LP, who will talk about Nava Montana's demonstration project to help both meet the needs of Montana that they've identified through their needs assessment process to improve participation and experience, while also helping to overcome some of the barriers to technology innovation broadly within the WIC program.
Awesome. Thank you, Martelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Peterson. My pronouns are she, her, and I go by LP. I'm a senior product manager here at Nava, and I am the product lead on our demonstration project with Montana. Next slide. So I'll start by grounding us back in Montana's needs assessment and state plan. You may recall this slide from earlier in the presentation, which shows Montana's priority area to increase participation in WIC and the related objective to increase recruitment of potentially eligible WIC participants. One strategy Montana identified was to pursue innovative projects and see whether an online screening or application tool could make access to WIC easier. And that's where we come in. Next slide. But before I dig into the demonstration project, I'll also ground us into a high-level user experience of WIC. This is a simplified version, of course, but shows that a WIC participant starts with gaining awareness of the program. This awareness could include referrals from family and friends, from doctors, nurses, or other medical providers, or even other referral partner programs like Head Start. After gaining awareness, they could call a WIC agency, for example, and begin their application. WIC staff will collect information about the applicant that can help determine eligibility. WIC applicants then attend a certification appointment, and from that point on, WIC staff can determine that participant's eligibility and they can be enrolled in the program. Based in Montana's priority to increase participation, the focus of our demonstration project is in the space between awareness and application, focusing on an eligibility screener that WIC agency staff can take action on. Next slide. So here are our more specific project goals. During a 6-month demonstration project, we aim to build an eligibility screener / referral and API prototype to improve participant experience with WIC and reduce barriers for referral partners. And I want to share that I see this as slightly different than the perhaps USDA pre-screening tool you might be aware of, because in this case, our aim is to collect that screener type data and share it with that WIC agency so WIC staff can take a next step. Whereas that USDA screener, to my knowledge, that data doesn't go anywhere to a WIC agency to take action. The second goal is to learn towards that API standard vision you just heard Martelle talk about by collecting evidence for the value of these API integrations. So we aim to qualitatively and or quantitatively show some burden reduction, say for participants, having WIC staff reach out instead of being the person to reach out to WIC, or for staff, having saving time by not having to enter application data into their MIS system. And in Montana's case, that's MSpirit. And the third goal is to contribute to WIC technology systems change and to share learnings from this demonstration project. And you'll hear more about that towards the end of my section. So when we kicked off the project in April, here's what we thought this product and API interaction could look like. At this point, we haven't done any learning, but we knew that there would be one chunk of this project, one eligibility screener prototype that would have, for example, a start page with some informational content. Then that WIC participant or potentially eligible WIC participant would enter basic eligibility information and then hit submit. And after they hit submit in some way, there will be a backend action for this API to facilitate data transfer from that eligibility screener or that user-facing product to the system that WIC staff use, like their MIS system. So after the API facilitates data transfer, the WIC staff could receive that participant information and take next steps, such as scheduling that certification appointment. And throughout our demonstration project and the phases I'll discuss with you in a moment, we wanted to refine this vision so we know more and more specifically what features we're building, what specific endpoints we're building for the API, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. So as you can imagine, 6 months is not a long period of time. It's amazing that we are almost halfway through this project. And we've broken this 6-month time frame down into 3 phases: discovery, delivery, and handoff. And it spans 13 total weeks, 13 total 2-week sprints. And sprints is a term in software development to mark 2 weeks of delivering something of value, whether that be building software, designing something, and staying in touch with our government partners along the way. So let's go to the next slide. We started first with a discovery phase. And the goal of discovery is to truly understand user and stakeholder needs based on their current WIC experience of the awareness and enrollment phases. We want to identify specific opportunities to improve what we've learned and devise a product and technical strategy to execute on the goals of the demo project and truly build that eligibility screener and prototype API integration with the MIS system. And in this short phase, we prioritized a lot of learning. We conduct research with stakeholders and users, generate system maps or user flows, work with technical partners to understand Montana's MIS system, ideate concepts and prototypes, and understand baseline data and define success criteria. From that phase, we move into delivery. And you can move to the next slide. And, with the plan we've developed based on our discovery learnings, we can start to deliver against our project goals. So in this phase, which is the majority of our project, our objectives are to design, build, and deliver a working prototype based on that product vision. We want to use our agile and iterative design and development processes and work towards validating the use of an API to integrate with an MIS system. So during this phase, we collaborate tightly with our government partners, continue to do user research and test our prototypes and ideas, write software to build our eligibility screener and prototype API integration, and just make sure we are validating and testing our hypotheses each step of the way. And after delivery, we'll package up our learnings, recommend next steps, and collaborate with Montana and any other stakeholders on those next steps. Next slide. So you've heard about our goals, and to wrap up my section, I'll share the outcomes we're working toward with this project. For our partnering state WIC agency, Montana, they'll have a completed demo project with us, a working prototype integration with the state's MIS, and a new open source tool, in this case, the eligibility screener. And finally, a new or enhanced capacity for running modern human-centered software development projects. And for those of you in the WIC community, which thank you so much for being here today, our aim is that you'll have additional insights about challenges and opportunities for WIC systems change and modernization, as well as a model API standard for one part of the WIC program. So next slide, I'd love to see you stay tuned with us throughout our upcoming talks and hear more about how this demonstration project is going. Up next in July, we'll share reflections from our discovery phase and talk through how we translated discovery learnings into a refined product vision, product roadmap, and technical plan for delivery. So now I'll hand it back to Kate to wrap us up.
Yes, and of course we are 6 minutes to the end of the hour, and so I will move pretty quickly through this so we have a few minutes. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the question box, and that way we'll be able to get to them a little easier. So just to summarize today, really our point here is to talk about best practices. It's not that anyone has to do exactly what we have done, but the summary of best practices that we covered today essentially is identify your program needs using data and evaluation, have needs drive program decisions, including technology, include the needs assessment or needs in the strategic planning, and leverage those as opportunities come up. Use modern software practices such as API standards and human-centered design, and then plan implementation and think forward towards sustainability. Ideal, right? So ideal world here. Next slide, please. And so just to finish off, and then we can jump into questions. I think all of us hopefully know what WIC has to offer. We're an amazing program. We do amazing things for many, many people, and it has a ton of potential. I know in Montana, we could double our participation and we could reach so many more people and have a much larger impact. But the program needs to evolve. It needs to update, and thankfully we do have some money on the horizon with ARPA 390 to potentially do some of this stuff. And so this is really a timely presentation as everybody thinks about how they might utilize some of those funds or work on some projects. This is a great foundation to move forward and to address innovation and modernization of the program. So with that, I'll pause and see if we have any other questions. And yeah, that's my daughter again. This one is really just to show that Montana is beautiful. So come visit us.
Thank you so much, everyone, all the presenters today. Yeah, we will take questions, and we'll also we're happy to continue the conversation in these future share outs that we'll be doing, and also we'll be happy to answer questions after the session today as well.
We have a question from the audience. Beyond this hopefully successful project, what are some potential ways to incentivize MIS vendors to support APIs?
That is a great question. So interestingly, we've been talking, we've been reached out to various MIS vendors and generally on board with this general vision. I think there are some larger systems challenges within how WIC does technology that we're trying to build evidence for, like why it's valuable to invest in this type of path forward, which is part of the impetus for the demonstration project. I think also just asking about it as states who are interested in doing this work and have heard have heard this presentation and are excited for the potential of what it can do. I think if we can build coalition around excitement for movement in this direction, that's generally helpful as well. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm actually giving you really concrete examples. Maybe Kate has some thoughts.
I mean, I guess what I would say is just a little insight into how MIS providers work, which is going to be hard to cover in a minute. But you know, the MISs, some of them are really truly owned by us, you know, and they're hosted, they're updated by contractors. And so in essence, it's our contracts that determine what happens with our MISs. It's groups and consortiums that drive the work in MISs. And so really the MIS systems and providers and companies should be responsive to our needs. That said, an API standard would be specific to each state because each state hosts their own MIS instance. Even if 20 of us share a system, if we implemented an API standard, that would just be for Montana. It would be replicable in others. It would be replicable.
Yeah, so it actually allow, we could create a standard based on understanding the functionality that's coming out of one MIS system, but the idea would be that the data transfers between any MIS system and these tools would be standardized regardless of the state.
Right. It would have to be implemented, I believe, at the state level, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
state,
kind of what
the
each
MIS,
state would have to drive it. Yeah.
each state would
So-
have to implement it. Yep.
So I think there's a lot of potential there from the state aspect, I think is where we're going with it. If it exists, I think we can push for it. Is there another question?
Yeah, we have one more question, actually a few more questions. Maybe we have time for one more though. Let's see. Which programs are tying into the WIC MIS? Does it include Medicaid, SNAP, and Head Start?
I'm not aware of any. I don't believe anyone has a standard like this. There are some, I mean, at least for Montana, we do have an interface where we can check eligibility, but I don't believe any states have that, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I agree, Kate. I don't think anyone has it.
Yeah.
It's more of an aspirational future state vision of where this could lead us to. But there's a lot of things that have to happen along the way.
There's a bunch more questions. I'm not sure if we have time for any more though.
I'm okay to stay on for a few minutes if we want to
Okay.
record them, and then folks who have to drop off can watch it.
Sure. Okay, so the next one is, you mentioned you want to increase participation by 10%. Besides building better tools for remote certifications, how will you pull people in? Did you consider marketing, or is this about making enrollment more equitable?
I would say the latter. So again, with participation increases, you're looking at recruitment and retention, and quite frankly, they're fairly even. We see a lot of people come into the program, a lot of people know about the program, but then I think I can hypothesize that based on their experience enrolling in the program and the antiquity of that, if that's the right word, they may not stick around. They might think, wow, this is a bit cumbersome for what I'm getting. So we have to change that balance of value. If we can make it more accessible in an equitable way. And so for somewhere like Montana, that's very rural and very large, that means having a way for people to enroll in WIC from a very small town that doesn't have an independent WIC clinic. And we have ideas for that. Again, remote enrollment is touching on it, but then we have to keep them. And so in order to keep them, they have to value the program. They have to have a good experience on the program. And just to know something about that statistic, it was to increase the reach of potentially eligible. So if a county has 50% potentially eligible families, and we're reaching 50% of those, that means they could double their participation. Increasing by 10% should be reasonable. So it's a little bit different spin on that data.
Cool. Why utilize new standards versus existing ones like FIRE?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll take a stab, and then I might pass it off to LP for some thoughts. So essentially the FIRE standard is specific to electronic health records. We would be wanting to create one that would be specific to WIC data and how WIC data gets collected and used within the program. So it would be similar value if you think about the value that the FIRE standard has brought to electronic health records, but it would be for the WIC program specifics, because it's not a direct translation. Like, we couldn't just take the FIRE standard and apply it as is right now to the WIC program, but we can learn from that standard.
Yeah, I think you answered it well, Martelle. The last point you made about learning from that standard that's exactly where my brain went with this question. Like, we can't use the FIRE standard because that is about EHRs, and it likely has specific data structures and things like that for that problem space. But understanding how the FIRE API standard is governed, understanding how people to engage people that want to use that standard. I think that's sort of research we want to do, so that the idea for a national API standard in WIC is even more solid.
Yeah, and I see a follow-up question related of, if for the WIC program specifically, would there be potential for bidirectionality. Actually, I'm not sure if that's related to the fire versus a WIC standard or both, or bidirectionality in data in and out. And I think the general answer to the question is yes. That is the point with the APIs and with the API standard, is that there can be bidirectionality between different systems. Back to referring providers. Let's see, bidirectionality. Referring from WIC to providers. Yes, that is a feasible. That is technically feasible outcome for this work.